big welcome to our latest panel discussion, which we're hosting here from Elemental, latest in our talk series on smart building technology. And today we'll be exploring how IoT and smart building tech can benefit owners, agents, and the occupiers as well of buildings. And we will be zooming in, apologies for the pun, on the user experience today. So exploring how these smart technologies through quality data and accessible analytics can actually help inform both the better management and building maintenance, but can also support owners and agents to respond with more agility to occupiers' requirements, and of course enhance the comfort and the well-being of occupiers and the individuals in the buildings themselves. So we'll be asking our panel to share their views on applications of smart tech as well for social housing and also within broader communities. So without further ado, I'd love to just introduce a fantastic panel of guests that we've brought together here today. So we have Simon Ward, who's Director of Sales for the UK and Ireland at Distech Controls, and many thanks to Distech for sponsoring this webinar that we're bringing to you today. We have Alex Edds, Director of Innovation at JLL. We have Paul Sorin, the Global Lead of the Built Environment at IBM. Paul McConnell, who's head of the Digital Experience Design team at Arup, and Julie Alexander, Director of Technology and Innovation at Places for People. So a wealth of experience and perspectives to bring to you today, and really encourage everyone to ask questions of the panelists, which we can put to them. So use the Q&A feature that we have on Zoom here to ask your questions, and we'll make sure we'll put as many as we can to the audience. To the panel from you. So without further ado, Simon, would you like to just start us off and thinking about the environment we're all living in with lockdowns and all sorts of stay-at-home orders? Will we ever return, you think, to sort of commercial buildings, and how might technology make it a bit safer for us perhaps to do so?
Thanks, Ben. I think that's the big question at the moment, isn't it? I mean, if you look at the amount of buildings that are potentially unoccupied at the moment, for various reasons, people maybe don't feel that their environment in the workplace is going to be safe. It could be corporate decision that is keeping people away from the workplace. It could be outdated systems that are installed in those buildings, and there's a number of things that we can we can utilize the technology that's available to us today to help people with those decisions. And there's two or three sort of points really that we can, kick the discussion off. The biggest one, and the question I get asked more than anything else, is about air quality. How can we ensure that the air is safe in those environments? Typically, buildings may have infrastructures that are fairly outdated, and need upgrading to be brought up to the current standards. So, additional filtration, it may be through some of the newer technologies that we see come into the markets at the moment. How can people be sure that they're actually in a safe environment? I mean, in a lot of occupied spaces at the moment, there is no indication of whether the CO2 levels are within the design parameters, whether the humidity levels are correct, etc. But then I think we've got to think about, the legislation around social distancing and how can we make the workplace comply with those requirements. So there are different things that the technology that's available today can be added to the existing systems that are in these buildings to help us with that. And I'll give you a few examples. For example, touchless technology. At the moment, if you want to change temperature in an office environment, typically you'd go to a wall device and you'd change the temperature on that. Technology allows us these days to connect to the system via mediums such as Bluetooth. So you have an interface on your own phone to allow you to change those parameters. And it's not only temperature, it can be lighting control, it can be window blinds, etc. as well within that. Buildings to comply with social distancing regulations, it may be that there's a certain route that you have to use within a building. So things like wayfinding technology allows us to help with those those requirements as well. But also there's we can apply things like people counting. So making sure that we only have the right amount of people in a meeting room to comply with those regulations. And also that we don't get sort of congestion of people in one particular area. If we've got that, we need to be able to identify that and take actions. So there's, 2 or 3 sort of examples of the technology that are available to us today to help our workplaces get back to a norm and help our occupants feel safe in those environments.
Great, thanks, Simon. I'm going to bring in a couple of other panelists who perhaps might want to build on that and talk about, from a building owner perspective. Clearly, safety and getting occupiers sort of back in and feeling safe is very important. But what about other potential benefits that we see in the property tech market kind of at the moment for building owners? And maybe could come to Alex. Would you like to comment on that, and then maybe Paul?
Yeah, sure. Pick up on that. I mean, what are the benefits of proptech to building owners is obviously a big question and a big answer. But I guess
what are you excited about? Maybe
just try and bottle it down. Yeah. And the way I advise clients is, first rule of proptech is stop talking about the tech, because the tech alone won't actually deliver anything. And I think the most important thing is, what is it you're trying to deliver? And obviously, we just talked a lot about how do we make buildings safer and cleaner and healthier. So I think depending on what it is you're trying to deliver and within the building, that's what the technology should try and deliver for you. I think there's a danger perhaps, and certainly I've seen this, where you sort of get lulled into the kind of holy grail of what the technology can provide, and then you end up changing business processes or asking people to change behaviors to adapt to the technology. That's the wrong way around. So I think however you're looking at the building and the space or whatever it is, and your vision for it, and certainly at the moment, as much as COVID and wellbeing are top of the agenda, I would say also sort of broader sustainability is also high up there, as is customer experience, which kind of goes hand in hand a little bit with what Simon was saying. And again, just sort of mapping out what is it you want the building to deliver, who's going to be responsible for delivering that. That's quite key. Who are the stakeholders? And then basically architecting the technology solution around that. And that, I think, is the best way you're going to get the best results that you need, rather than as I say, hearing something because it looks good and then realizing you've got to change your ways to make it work.
So what is it do you think occupiers really care about? What are we perhaps seeing in the market? Maybe I don't know if Paul McConnell, would you like to
yeah, sure, happy to add on. And I add on to what Alex is saying quite a bit. I think it's the benefit for building owners right now is for them to understand the process for them to kind of utilize technology. So as Alex said, it's we know technology will be part of the solution, but what's the question? And that's what you're kind of probing at earlier. So I think it's a pretty difficult, daunting task. If you're a property owner that owns a portfolio of different spaces with different types of clients struggling through their own markets. And so you quickly need to kind of have these learning loops in which you're helping understand how they're working. And then essentially, what they value, how they can upskill their staff, how they market and maintain it. And in order to start thinking about how proptech fits in, because when I think of the spaces that we once used to go to often or travel through often, the ones that really made the hair on the back of your neck stick out, it was this beautiful orchestration of services, space, and technology. Often the technology is very much in the background. And, I think it's tough. So I think a property owner needs to be able to kind of listen, understand the kind of the maturity of themselves or the people that they're the occupiers, and essentially start to stitch together these integrated experiences in time. And maybe even start to think about what they're measuring. I think we went from an era of just measuring occupancy to saying, maybe it's quality of space. So I'm thinking about even in retail, we can look at something where a high-end jewelry store, might have very little foot traffic, but it's the value of that space is really important because of one transaction. And maybe that's what we're getting to with our office spaces. It's that couple of days a week where you're having really key collaborative sessions, and that makes that space worthwhile as opposed to cramming a lot of people in desks.
Interesting. Thanks, Paul. Maybe I'll pull in Julie. Would you like to kind of comment on this one and talk about is it like, how do you measure quality almost, like, or what do people really care about in terms of the quality of the space or of the buildings that they're occupying?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I work for a housing delivery agency, both in social housing and private sector housing. And it's a very different space, different customer requirements to commercial buildings where people are typically gathering, and the buildings are there so they can gather and meet. We're sort of on the other end at the moment where you've got people in their homes and we're trying to ensure that they're safe and they have the kind of spaces that they need, because obviously everyone is being asked to stay at home for work, for homeschooling, and just sort of day-to-day activities. So we're finding quite a lot of issues arising that weren't there before COVID, really, and we're trying to ensure those spaces are as adaptable and amenable as they can be. And when it comes to our new build program, we're looking at how we can change designs really to accommodate some of these needs. So we're, up until recently, open plan, kitchens, dining rooms, living rooms were quite the thing. What we see now is a need for compartments, people to have spaces where they can be in and work, or the kids can be separate to where the rest of the family are. So it's really changing our thinking around, you know, how the home is designed, modeled, and then what kind of technology can we put in there to help us. And we have some very vulnerable residents, and we were using some IoT technology really around heating systems, which was to ensure that heating systems are working, and that if they weren't going to, if they're going to fail, that we would have advanced notice of that, so people wouldn't be there cold in the winter, as is often the case when boilers switch themselves off day one of the heating season. So we put in an IoT technology, got all this data coming through around humidity levels, everything else through to a dashboard. But one of the capabilities of that technology is to allow for scheduling of visits should the boiler fail or need maintaining. So there is a two-way communication panel. And that allows us to send messages to those homeowners to say, boiler's failed, we want to come and see you 5 o'clock on Thursday, is that okay? And then we arrange the meeting. But actually we can send any communication on that device. And we were just beginning to install these when COVID started. And when we hit lockdown, we decided to turn our call-in centre to a call-out centre. We've got 70,000 homes that we needed to find out, you know, are people okay? So 7,000 calls were made in the first few weeks. Actually, if these devices had all been installed, it would have been the press of a button. We could have communicated with 70,000 people in a minute, as quick as an email, signposting them, are you okay, do you need more advice, etc. All the things that we had to do via phone calls. So I think the technology, you may install it for a reason, but it may have multiple benefits. It may bring so many added value assets really to what you're trying to achieve in your day-to-day business. So it's worth thinking about, you know, how else can these technologies be used now that times have changed and needs are changing as well.
Absolutely. And an interesting question as well, I think we've already had from one of the audience members, so I'm going to use this to bring you in, Paul, and perhaps you could expand on it. But yeah, kind of a practical question about, you know, do healthier buildings, do they like use more energy, and is it possible to combine that with also a healthier building with a more efficient building? And maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So yeah, I would say the key is really to look into it holistically. I mean, I did a long work. Well, I did a lot of work back since 2012 with housing associations. Back in there was Sustainable Homes with Andrew Eagles and Arab on designing a kind of we used to call it E4 home it was with Wienerberger, but genuinely a home principles where you look at not just how you design it in a design for the best cost, but you look at the overall life cycle of the building, because we have an HBC talking about 120 years building, but how you look at, I think Julie mentioned it, how you look at a building which is designed in a way that you can have, and there is an example, we did with BRE as well, how you design a building which could have just 2 beds. You can then transform them quickly into 3 beds, and then you know, simple things like having an attic space in the loft for an additional bedroom upgrade, so you don't have to rehouse tenants basically as they with the needs. And if you then use, and the technology should be used in a way, again, from a holistic perspective, not just HVAC. Someone is talking about HVAC and just controls IoT, but if we really collect the data from the design with the intent throughout the whole life cycle, and understand the building, what is in the building, and it is digitally accessible, almost like a digital logbook, then you can start analyzing and do some clever stuff with it, with the technology, because then you can analyze if a boiler performs as it should be performing, and you can start looking at, you know, that building as being more as a living asset, if you want to call it that way, and that way you can start analyzing pricing, replacement of pricing, utilizing warranty inventory, purchase orders, you know, things like the regular stuff, which we don't see it as a digital transformation because it's not part of this BIM bubble, if you want to call it in the UK, or digital twin. But these are the processes which you can start automating and bringing, including rental payments and all of that.
And we're going to come on a bit more into sort of the design process and how that should work, and challenges perhaps around that in a moment. I want to go back to and bring in another question that we've just had, and come to Alex here. So two questions, Alex. One, which we had from the audience, you know, example of what good looks like. What are the smartest buildings out there? Just give us a flavor of some of the things that they can do, but also why are we not seeing more of that? Why are we not seeing these technologies rolling out perhaps faster than perhaps we would like?
Yeah, so I mean, I put some notes on this, on the answer. I mean, just, you know, top of my head, some good case studies of buildings and clients that I'm aware of that are certainly pushing the bounds in terms of, I guess, you know, to use the previous question of what is smart, because that's the other thing, right? What do we actually mean by smart building? And I suppose, not to go off on a tangent, but there is some emergence of new standards emerging. There's in fact 2. In fact, there's 3, but 2 certainly that are gaining traction. One out of Amsterdam, of the smart building certification, and also one by WiredScore, which is the label, the certification of connectivity. So both of them are creating, you know, a sort of benchmark and a standard for what do we mean by a smart building, which I think will bring some clarity to the market. Real estate is a market by, you know, it's demand supply, and I think things like labels and standards, perhaps unfortunately, are quite useful, particularly for the developer community. So I think in terms of that question, and then what does smart look like, I think we're going to get a lot more clarity and transparency in the market, you know, through the use of those tools. I would also say that you know, we're working on a number of projects now that will be coming, you know, to market over the next 2-3 years. So I think, you know, there will be a lot more examples of what we mean by a smart building to actually go and look at. I suppose just to finish off in terms of some of the challenges, you know, certainly there are many, and not least the challenge between who pays for it and who's going to benefit, and that's always the challenge with you know, with any kind of building project, really, particularly if it's you know, spec build by a developer, which, you know, often it is. So, and you know, one of the questions, and certainly, you know, one of the most frequently asked questions I get by developers is, you know, how do I future-proof my building ready for whatever might come? And it's a bit of a crystal ball moment. And I think fundamentally, it's about equipping your building to be as flexible as it can be. And obviously, in the context of this, from a technology perspective, to cater for, you know, multiple scenarios, or at least multiple use cases. In fact, just before this, I was on a call with you know, a fiber optic provider, and being able to sort of supercharge the, you know, the delivery of high-end connectivity into buildings, because, you know, the amount of data traffic passing through buildings is set to increase exponentially. So it's a multifaceted, you know, approach, and I think, you know, certainly the landlord-tenant conversation is one which I think is starting. We're certainly starting to have slightly more educated and informed conversations, and sort of facilitating those conversations. But I think when you can get, you know, occupier clearer on what they want and what they want to drive out of the building, and I refer back to my earlier points customer experience, sustainability, or whatever it might be, coming to the table and having a conversation with the landlord about, okay, how can your product ultimately help support that? And then obviously the product can then better cater for ultimately its end user. So I think, fundamentally it's about conversation, and then having a more informed conversation between the two, and ultimately any middlemen.
Yeah. And Simon, do you want to build on that one?
Yeah, just on mute. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Alex. But one of the things that we sometimes fail to capture is some of the smart technology that goes into these buildings. They're not sort of short-term projects. They're not delivered within, a small time frame. One of the challenges that we tend to see in the marketplace is these smart building solutions are developed over a number of years, or in excess of a 12-month period. The challenge being that technology is moving so quickly is that the day that a specification is created to the time frame of when the building is delivered, the technology has moved on so much that our clients are really asking for the latest and greatest when the building becomes available. So there needs to be some form of flexibility in that design process. It may change throughout the construction period. And I think that everybody needs to be aware of that, and the client needs to embrace that, the design that we sign off on today may not be the design that we end up with when the building is actually handed over. And that's something that is a real challenge for us. And I think the second point is that, you can put 10 people in a room and ask them what a smart building solution is, and you'll get 10 different answers. People's views are very, very different. So it kind of goes back to, I think, what you were saying earlier on. It's about having those fundamental conversations with the client very, very early on. What is it that you need from your building to allow you to operate in the most efficient manner without changing your business practices, but to use technology to add to what they want from their building?
And I might maybe Paul McConnell, would you like to come in on here just around? I mean, we certainly heard Simon there also talking about this, if you like, the technology flywheel seems to turn at a bit more of a rapid pace perhaps than the real estate flywheel, and the time frames that you might be looking at when you're building buildings. But any other challenges as well that
I think it's great to hear all these points. I'm writing other side notes to kind of ping everyone later and other questions. But I think one of the things is, one, I kind of take this as a designer. Like a lot of us have worked in kind of what you would label the smart city world for a number of decades, and people didn't get that for a while. It was just kind of confusing, a lot of top-down rhetoric, and it was hard for people to understand. And over time, it started to roll out. So I think there's something around that. It's like oftentimes it's change and it's confusing. So we really need to kind of get to that. Like, are people not understanding the value from actually the occupier, the building owner, or the people, or the people that are residing or working within? Are they confused? Are they scared? I think there's been a huge conversation that's kind of bubbled up over the last few years around data and data ethics. So there is a resistance to say, wait, what am I signing up for? What are you doing here? And I think we as practitioners need to get better at how we tell that story, explain that value. But I think we're actually kind of like, I always find it really interesting about these two worlds that are coming together. So we have kind of the world of technology that's evolved over the years, and through rapid cycles of learning, storytelling, deploying, and kind of shipping and improving products. And then we see how resilient that's been through bubbles. And then actually you see how resilient that communities have been through COVID, where people painted bike lanes and set up their own store, like cafes, to save their businesses. But the things in the middle that we're talking about today are the ones that are really struggling with it. So how do we take these kind of principles that are working on both sides and pull them together? And essentially, I think in many ways, this field is kind of like personal computing in the early 80s. We have a lot of different disciplines coming together from very different philosophies. So you have people that come from UX, people that come from software development, people that come from MEP engineering that have become, and we're kind of still figuring out how you work together. And I'm pretty excited because I'm seeing more and more of that, of kind of mixed discipline teams saying like, you know what, we're tearing down the walls of like, what vendor are you, JLL, you IBM? Like, we just need to get in a room with a lot of different people, think about this problem and solve it together. So I think that's hopefully what I think occupiers or clients will do. They'll kind of like unlock, put good teams together. I'm looking at Julie and saying like, oh my God, 70,000 houses we know for Places for People. Like, this is such a huge, interesting set. Pull in a lot of people and create an environment for them to kind of pilot and push new pieces together.
It sounds exciting. I don't know, Julie, do you want to comment on that? I know you're probably having challenges perhaps over your connection, but do you want to talk about some of the challenges that we've seen with just around actually that, like the pace of adoption with sort of some smart technology and the future that you see of how we can do more? That's like, you know, multidisciplinary teams, like teams beyond from, you know, not worrying about what provider or what brand perhaps you work for. Would that be beneficial to you? Do you see that? Are there other challenges that you've seen from your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was interesting. Paul mentioned demonstrating the value, and that's something that I'm trying to do now, because I moved from the supplier side, working with Siemens, to customer side to ensure more adoption. Because you know, working in the sort of manufacturing sector, and you know how great the technology is, but the customer doesn't, and why should they? So I made the move so that we could try and sort of implement some of these solutions. And actually, what I realized I had to do was sort of engage reverse a little bit to bring everyone with me. So one of my particular interests is the value that can be created from a digital twin, and I'm working on that at the moment. And you know, I'm quite excited about it, because I'm sure there are great use cases, but actually no one's really demonstrated that yet. So I'm undertaking a project at the moment. We're going to build a digital twin of an existing estate, implement IoT solutions, get that visualization, demonstrate the use cases to build back better in our upcoming developments, and through our asset management part of the business, allow them to have access to data they never had before. So I'm sure there's value there, but I've got to convince everybody. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. It's really trying to demonstrate the value, because I think that's the only way we'll get the message across.
And it's a good chance, I think, also to slightly segue into the design process as well, because we're talking about, you know, like how do you creating this technology and demonstrating the value to users or to occupiers. But we've also, and rightly, had a question in here about you know, how many buildings start out perhaps with smart intentions, but when we're handed over to the occupiers, maybe they don't kind of get fully realized. Paul, could I come to you and just talk about, from the design sort of process, like what can we do to improve that design process for, you know, what gets built to how we actually operationalize some of this technology?
Yeah, I mean, there is like I mentioned before, and I think Alex touched on it, it's the important aspect is to really set what you want to achieve, have the deliverables, understand, you know, in a plain language, what you want from the building, what's the life cycle of not just a building, but genuinely of an asset. And then obviously look into existing, for example, the UK BIM framework now, which is been finalized. The ISO 19650 series has been finalized about information management, the assets. We now have so lot is available there, but it's important really to look at that holistic approach, understanding what information, what are the data drops, what I want from that particular asset as a client, and then take it from there. And then the technology is there to support it. It's not, I would say, never try to shoehorn technology into, you know, because it's in, and we're seeing that quite a lot with blockchain, digital twin. Now we have a golden thread, we have, you know, also all sorts of buzzwords. And I feel sometimes, including housing associations and the clients, are just being dragged into this, you know, let's do this, let's do that. We have a BIM for housing associations. We have you know, all sorts of initiatives without them really clearly understand what they need as an organization, and having that path set, not just for 2 years, but really look at where you want to be as a housing association, in this case, for example, in 5-10 years, and then build it from there. I think that's for me is the key aspect. So the process end-to-end process, holistic approach, and understanding using the, I would encourage the ISO 19650 series to really get that process in and integrate with the supply chain.
And let's talk about then some of the benefits for a housing association, or even in social housing. I don't know, Paul, if you want to carry on commenting, and obviously Julie as well from your experience here. But try and make it really practical. Like, what are some?
I'll be quick, and I'll let Julie go deeper, because they have such a large set of projects that we've collaborated with them in the past. But I think, echoing completely with Paul Cern just mentioned, it's the process. Between everyone on this panel, we have the tech, the hardware. We could do it. We could go, set up a space right now. But it's often you get a room full of people with their arms crossed that are very skeptical about what you're trying to do. And so you need to show them that you're listening to them, their goals, their behaviors, their motivations, and be open, even if you have a vision of a space, to change that vision, because you're going to learn a lot about that specific context. And then it becomes ongoing engagement. As Simon said, these things take a long period of time. So, engagement isn't just a forum. There's different ways that you can do it. It might be an outreach, like Julie mentioned, through just keeping up people updated with notifications. But it's more and more, it's the process. And I think, oddly, digital technology, which kind of we're talking about this implication, it's given people the tools to block or complain about things that they wouldn't have had 20 years ago. So, you could just, ram a large project down, deploy it, get approvals. Now you really can't. We're seeing these in a lot of RFPs, or this is kind of obviously talking more about the public sector, but we have to demonstrate, how do we know about the impact? How are we engaging people? So these are often requirements we're seeing, when tenders are coming out, probably from organizations like Julie, like, show us how you're going to engage with people, show us how your process is going to, or what your learnings are going to influence your design. And so, really this idea of co-creation, engagement over a life cycle, and being able to adapt, because something like a COVID might hit, is really important. And I think it's probably more important than the technology, which I think we're refining, and we're in a really good spot on. Sorry, Julie.
Julie, do you want to go next? And then
sure. Paul's so right. It's the people, and the process, and they create the process. And sometimes actually you do have to change the process, because it's based still on something that's maybe 10, 20 years old, and it's out of date, and it's not working effectively. It's just what people are used to. And by introducing that new technology, we give ourselves the opportunities to be more efficient. And the technology I was talking about earlier, the IoT technology, we'll get alerts. We'll get alerts if a boiler is not working, or alerts if there's a likelihood of damp in a property. And the question of who should get that alert and how should they act upon it, that's probably been the thing that's taken us longest to work out. Technology's in, people are using it, but it's like, how do we get that back into our business and do something about it? So that, for me, that whole kind of information integration, there's the technology integration, which is another whole conversation, and then for another day, but the sort of information integration into business workflows, how we respond to that. And there's a group of people who understand the technology, but actually we've got a new user group now whose job is to go out and fix the boiler, whose job it is not to understand how IoT technology works, but still somehow they have to be at the end of this. So that for me absolutely is the hard bit. It's getting everyone to agree to a process, and sort of defining new processes really that weren't there before. And I think, going forward, for me, this kind of big win, apart from our customers, is our asset managers. If they can have more intelligent data, then for us, with so many homes that we own and manage, 200,000 in all with those that we manage, that's a mammoth task. We've got information sitting in different systems. If I'm interested in an estate, I've got to go to several different systems to get information about that one estate. So what we need is something far more sophisticated, far more efficient. And it does mean changing what we've done before. So yeah, it's people and process, always is.
Absolutely, yeah. Paul, did you want to comment there?
Yeah, okay, yeah. I'd like to. I mean, like I mentioned, we also I used to work on this with, actually, it was Christian Steele at Arab. When we looked at with the whole team, we've looked at the framework on around the people, around the tenants, and then and the asset owner. And we even looked at, because I personally bought a house from Place for People back in 2012, and we tested with one of the regional directors. What we did is my front door needed to be replaced because there was some issues with the defect. It actually took about 10 visits from different engineers to do that. It was 5 times repainted the wrong color because they could not find the RAL code which was requested on that street by the planners. So actually, just to repair a door, it cost Places for People over £4,500, and that was just one of house. And I was still a freeholder, but my experience was not great. So what I'm always saying, and when we did this project with Arab and Christian Steele and this team, was about how we use almost like how you can create predictive maintenance, but exactly for that engineer, how they can turn up before just only once, not 3 or 4 times, understanding what's going on, what's wrong, having the right part numbers, being able to search and get them locally in the local depots or local even B&Qs. What's the pricing? All of that could be done quite easily. We just don't use it. And if you think about the cars, you turn up to a car dealership, they just plug in, they see a logbook of changes. Right now, even if I'm a freeholder, we all buy our houses, and that's, and even tenants, they live in houses, and you know more about your dishwasher than about your house. And that's probably including for the social housing operators. They usually don't even know what is in the asset. And I think that's part of the problem. And that's back to Julie, is really get that process in, understand the asset, and really get that asset down to even a single product level and understand it, and then make it easy of use for the actual local supply chain who manages usually the properties.
Hopefully you got your door, Paul. Hopefully that was sorted out by now.
Yeah, it took actually 4 years actually to do it.
Yeah,
he's freezing.
We talked a lot about buildings, but I want to just bring it on to communities as well and talk a little bit about that, and then take a few more questions from our listeners. But we're talking with communities, with maybe multi-use developments as well. How can we perhaps use technology more to foster community? Obviously, we've seen some examples Paul was sharing about responding to coronavirus and that sort of thing. But Alex, maybe I could come to you and just talk a bit about how can we use this to help foster communities? What are perhaps some of the challenges that you've seen with that? Yeah,
sure. I mean, there are probably others on the group that maybe have more direct experience of this, but certainly, a number of our commercial developers are increasingly building and developing mixed-use schemes. Just the way that it is, particularly within urban areas. And so this question is kind of critical to them, not least because depending on the location, there's an element of needing to kind of deliver placemaking as part of that strategy, because there might be a 15-year build out time. And so it's really important that they kind of cultivate that placemaking experience, bring people in to that space, and ultimately create an identity and sort of cohesiveness around the space. And I would certainly say that's front and center of a number of developers' strategies. Delivering it is obviously is the next question. And I think from many of them are, and certainly again the conversations we're having them is how can we utilize digital technologies to support that. And I suppose in a way this kind of goes back to the point before, and I see on the question there's a question about smart building technology being retrofitted. It all comes back to what do you mean by smart building? And I think this essence of digitally connecting the community, whether that's in the building or around the building, is certainly part of the delivery of or at least within the scope of certainly from an investor or developer's perspective, the scope of how can I get return on my smart building investment? Because fundamentally you're trying to connect, whether it's people or devices. And so, we're certainly looking at a number of digital communication tools, which is probably a fairly standard, solution. I guess I would just say, and this is certainly something that has come up a number of times, is, you know, who takes responsibility for that? Is that the responsibility of the developer to roll out an app for every single person on the site to use, whether you're a resident, a retailer, a visitor? That's a big ask, that's a big investment, and that requires a whole new operational model, because as we all know, if your app isn't updated at least once every 3 months, it looks a bit faded and you sort of don't use it anymore. I mean, that's, you know, that will happen. And I think also, and indeed, you know, wherever we all may live, there are other apps out there who, you know, try and deliver kind of community, whether it's Nextdoor or even Facebook or whatever. There are a number of other, you know, companies that are in this space. So I think differentiating yourself, your product, ultimately to the community that you want to bring together, and ultimately offering them something that is unique, and that, you know, that no one else can offer. So packaging that all up, and it comes back to the conversation already, is think clearly about the strategy and what you're actually trying to deliver before jumping into the technology. And once you've understood that, then you can then embark on, and actually maybe your best bet is to just roll out a WhatsApp group. But you know, you don't know that until you've understood exactly what it is that you want to achieve. And I think sometimes, you know, if I repeat myself, sorry, but sometimes it's so easy to jump into, let's get a really good tech solution, because it's, you know, it looks like it's what we need, when actually it might not be, and it might be too complicated. So I don't know if that's an answer to your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm going to ask a couple of our panelists to build. I'll ask Simon first, and then Paul McConnell as well.
Yeah, as a manufacturer of product, I mean, the missing link has always been that, you know, that app that people are looking for. So we've taken a different view to that, in that we supply, or we have an out of the box solution that can be provided to any kind of environment, be that a healthcare facility, be that commercial office space, be that mixed use developments. There's some standard pieces of functionality in there where you bring the community together, and the elements that would be most sort of useful are, there's the sort of messaging media that we use for that, where everybody that's as part of that mixed use development, for example, is part of that messaging group. Things like if you need to report any maintenance issues on the property, that, you know, you've got, for example, Paul, your front door needs replacing, or, you know, there's a boiler that's not working or whatever, they can be reported on that app as well. It's centrally dealt with and managed very, very quickly. And then you can start to add other pieces of functionality on there. If you've, for example, the gymnasium, you might want to book some time at the gymnasium to make sure that we haven't got too many people in there at any one time. That kind of functionality can be added. It can be completely customized. It can be sold as an SDK, but we no longer have to go to those specialist app developers to have those tools created. You know, they are becoming more mainstream now. So I think that's something that when we're talking about smart building technology, the people that are going to invest in those properties want that functionality. So it's certainly part of the jigsaw that the industry is reacting to.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Paul McConnell, did you want to comment on that as well? Yeah. Just around communities?
Yeah, really quickly, because I just think it's this fascinating moment to kind of talk about this relationship between technology and community. Like, I'm thinking about when I got started coding really badly, designed websites in the 90s, it was this kind of blurred, like, what's this potential of technology, but it was also this kind of like punk rock community of like, you know, there's something really special about it. And I think since then, we've always been expecting this, you know, there's this wave of technological change. If you think about, like, you know, from the early internet to mobile to artificial intelligence, the companies that have been able to spot that change and kind of come up with new business models are the ones that are kind of dominating all industries right now. So we've always been expecting this next wave of a technological shift. But what COVID is doing, it's a sucker punch around human behavior. It's, you know, how do we exist? How do we behave with each other, with people? How will we resume life? And so I think that's a really interesting opportunity. I've never seen anything like it. It is, I talked to my team, like, this is the moment of our portfolios that as we work through this, we'll be hopefully talking about on panels for years to come of how we did a good job. But I think this interesting thing of like this relationship public and private. It isn't just a property developer on their own. It's so important. Like I'm a New Yorker. Ridership is down 80%. How do you build trust in the transit system to let people feel more comfortable to then even go to an office space, to even go there? And I think hopefully there's this nugget and this level of like, you know, people come to places for opportunities, for new ideas, to be around other people. But there is this larger sequence of kind of like your day in the life, and that is your way to work, you know, being safe while at work, being safe around work, making it interesting to be there where you want to have a coffee or look at a shop. So I think it's this, again, this, you know, we've seen this dependency in the past of the private sector, or sorry, the public sector being dependent on private funding to develop things. So for those who work in smart projects, smart Wi-Fi, bike shares, et cetera, these are all those relationships. But actually it's probably the other way around. I think, you know, commercial property has a real dependency on the public sector to do their jobs to kind of move people around and get them through. So I think this is kind of this level of this broader sense of community and the potential of technology that really excites me.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to take a couple of questions from the audience, and do feel free to type into the Q&A function, or if you can't find it, there's the chat as well, and we'll try and get through as many as possible before we wrap up at the end of the hour. So we've got a couple more that have come in, and I know the panelists have been answering some as we've gone as well. So talking just a little bit about retrofit, it's quite a broad question. Can smart building technology be retrofitted to existing buildings, say a large housing portfolio? I presume sort of the answer is sort of like yes, but it depends on a bunch of things. I don't know, Julie, sort of from your experience, do you want to sort of comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is yes. Goes back to a lot of what Alex is saying is, you know, what technology for what purpose. But I mean, certainly, yes. I think it's challenging because, you know, when we're getting into homes, people already live, they've got certain expectations, and we have a lot of issues now around GDPR, what data we can collect, how we can anonymize it, what we're using it for. Had a lot of conversations about that this week around IoT in homes, and it's just really understanding you know, what the purpose of the project and how you're going to protect data. I'm doing a project at the moment like called Forever Living Homes, but it's about how can people live in their homes longer, more independently. And so we have to really survey our customers to understand, you know, as their lives change, how are their vulnerabilities changing, and where would they like some support. This is not for people necessarily who are sort of further on down the life curve, but people who are beginning to feel a little less comfortable at home on their own. And so we're sort of tracking, you know, what is it you feel day to day, and even questions like that are around health and well-being. Suddenly that data becomes high-risk data, and we have to spend a lot of time just working out how we can anonymize it, how we can get that to a third party without us having access to it, etc. So again, it's the process around all of these things. Of course, we could go in and just install. We have to be aware that not everyone has Wi-Fi, so we have to ensure we've got communication protocols that will suit our client base. They're quite robust because we become responsible to maintain them. If they fail, we become liable for that failure. So there's a lot of things really we have to consider. But certainly, yes, it can be done. And the areas we're looking at are things like health and well-being, environmental sustainability, whether that's air quality or energy management. Those are typical uses where we've got communal buildings, how we manage the communal systems on IoT devices, etc. So definitely, it's certainly on my radar, but I'm just sort of taking it baby steps at the moment, trying to bring everyone with me, which is a bigger task, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. Any other comments on that? Should we take another question? If anyone is desperate to answer, it's a great answer. We've got another one from another anonymous attendee. Can smart buildings offer anything to building sort of aesthetic? So talking about things like biophilic design, sort of like plants and bringing the natural environment in. Is that part of the sort of smart buildings? Anyone want to comment on this?
I think it can be, but I think it's more about the fundamental design of the building rather than just the smart elements of it. Looking at what, you know, nature can provide in the way of natural cooling, filtration and things like that should be incorporated within the building. From a smarts point of view, then it just becomes kind of a monitoring and reporting process. I guess that goes back to, the community element and providing that dashboard that gives us a record of how the building has performed and how much the smart technology has provided to the environment and the biophilic design has provided to that environment. So I think it's a combination of the two, but for me it's about the core fundamental design of the building and incorporating some of those features in making sure that we provide the right environment.
Mm-hmm. And Alex?
Yeah, I like that question because partly it's sort of I guess true to where and what I'm interested in. But I think it annoys me with all the money in the world that we have. In the 21st century, we still build glass boxes and they're really ugly. So I think, and there's a massive focus on efficiency and operational efficiency and delivery of the product. And often that's the conversation, particularly with smart, is about how do we improve that process rather than how do we make the product that we're delivering to look nicer, to look better, and to be I guess stand the test of time. And I think refer back to the point earlier about the sort of community element and placemaking, and I think design plays a crucial part in that. I guess the only thing I would say, and again comes a little bit back to the definition of smart building, but I think if you're utilizing technologies and certainly some of the construction technologies that are available to kind of smarten the delivery of whether it's offsite manufacturing, but also pre-design of intricate designs can now be developed within the factory, kind of brought to site in a much more affordable way. So I would like to think anyway that the evolution of that sort of offsite manufacture, combined with some kind of intricate designs, will allow us to create much more interesting spaces that aren't, don't require kind of heavy, expensive on-site labor, which often has been the challenge. So a slight tangent answer, but it's something which I think, it's important certainly to if we want to if cities want to attract people back into the city from working from home, then they're certainly going to have to make them look a lot nicer. So
interesting point. Yeah, and also there was a parallel, a couple of comments earlier. I remember we talked about Julie, you mentioned that open plan living. People now actually working from home, having a lot more stuff that they're having to do in the house. Seeing a shift away from that. We've got historically a lot of office space has been very open plan. I don't know, we're seeing a big shift away from that yet in office space in commercial buildings yet, or would you expect to perhaps?
I don't know if you're asking me, but yeah. I think we're going through that transformation. I think the answer to that question is not yet known. Still very much in the kind of open plan era, but I think certainly the demand from occupiers post or during and post COVID is an increased amount of collaboration space, because they recognise that's really why and what people want to come back into the office for. So I think reducing the amount of kind of fixed desks and creating more open spaces is certainly a trend. What that will look like long term in terms of a new era is, I think, unclear. But certainly we're in the midst of that now.
Yeah, I used to work in a building in Dublin. It was supposedly one of the smartest buildings. It was the Accenture's Innovation Centre over there, the dock. They put all the desks on wheels, so maybe they will now be able to put them all to the side and be able to use it more for collaboration space. So at least maybe the building itself is perhaps more resilient and more flexible and more agile in some of its uses. So, and all the power kind of came from the ceiling. So that type of design seems to be quite useful. One question here from Chris before we wrap up and get a final thought from everyone. But which areas do the commercial property industry see to benefit the most from smart technology in the operation of buildings? So maybe just I get a comment, go around the group. One, like the absolute, obvious thing that we should be doing. Where is the most benefit that we might see? Paul McConnell, did you want to?
Yeah, I'll be quick. And there's definitely more expertise on this panel than I can offer. But my gut says, with deregulation requirements, that's going to be a real push in the smart building technology. What I hope is that it might introduce as Paul Stern was saying before, kind of increased standards. Because most often, if you're working on these smart building projects, you have a smart elevator, a BIM system, digital twin. That information doesn't talk to each other as easily as let's say, I would say, other types of technology. So I think maybe that pressure for deregulation, in which we need better tools to gather, organize, share, and learn and report, that might kind of streamline a lot of issues that we have often when we want to kind of shape an ideal experience. Then you realize that there is a nest of different vendors and how they work and what they want to share, and how they structure even data. So I think that it's a potentially big opportunity.
Great, thanks, Paul. And then I'm going to go around the panel with our final question. What's the one thing we need to do to get the full benefit of property technology? I don't know if Julie, would you like to go next?
The one thing that we have to do to get the benefit.
One thing, yeah. Well, if you had one wish, a magic wand, what's the one thing that you want to? What's the focus on here?
I would like to be able to focus on using technology to deliver net zero carbon in the fastest time possible.
So get really clear on that purpose and that objective, and
so many
stop
things.
getting distracted by some of the other things out there. Okay, great. Thanks, Judy. Paul, Søren, would you like to go next?
And if one thing we need to do, in my opinion, is to the adoption of the small medium businesses and then collaboration. I think that's been one of the biggest failures so far, that if you look at the adoption for the SMEs, which are absolutely key for the larger organizations to fully benefit, that hasn't happened. They're not there. They are being left on their own. And they've been left to all the different quick fixes, and that's why we don't see the adoption of technology and common processes.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Alex, should I go next?
Sure. So I think also just picking up on the question before around where do we see commercial real estate biggest challenge? I think transparency of information through the entire building life cycle is something which I know certainly is close to Paul's heart around BIM or digital twin. That type of technology can serve to create a much more efficient operational building. It doesn't for the moment, and I think my one. If I could wave my magic wand, or is it a magic wand? I don't know, but ultimately it comes down to skills. I think at the moment the industry is a bit lost in translation with regard to technology, and there's not enough knowledge on both sides of the table about either your customer or the supplier's product or how it can help and the market it operates in. So I think we just need to up the skills on both sides of the table to understand how best to leverage the technology that's out there. I think once we've done that, we can make some big strides.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Alex. And last but not least, Simon.
Yeah, I think for me in the sector that I'm involved with, I really agree with Julie and what you said. It's about trying to achieve this net carbon zero. We look at the systems that we have there. We've got to drive those to give us better efficiencies in our building and reduced energy. And then looking towards technology, I think AI or artificial intelligence is going to play a big part in that in the future of how our buildings operate. And we've got a lot to learn from that space.
Okay, well, we're just about out of time. I want to thank everyone for their questions and engagement, and of course thank everyone here, our panelists, for your brilliant insight and answers and your time today. So to Simon, Alex, Paul, Julie and Paul, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much to Distech as well, and Simon for sponsoring this session, and keep an eye out for future talks. All the information is available both on the Elemental Expo website, a whole series of Elemental talks around topics that we've been exploring today, and also on the YouTube channel as well. So thanks everyone. See you again soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe.